Good morning. Today's Tuesday. We are learning the eighth Perek of Shabbos. Today's shiur is sponsored the Ilay Nishmas Aaron Nachum and Simcha Cohen, Yeshua Murcha B'Shep, Sil Bracha Sarba Shmuel Leib, and B'Yam Moshe Ben Yosef. May the Neshamas will have an aliyah. And it's also sponsored the Fuh Shlema Ad Sar Bas Leah, Chana Pesel Bas Yenta, Yisrael Ben Rachel Leah, Rachel Bas Pesel Zelda, Avram Yitzchak Ben Risha, and Chaya Bas Doba Bela. Fush Sanef Fush Sagub Sosh Archal Yisrael. Amen. And Schus Favita Aaron Ben Kitamasha Shefa Bracha Vaslecha for him and his entire mishpacha. Okay, here we go. Perek 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 Ches starts off as a continuation of the end of yesterday's Perek. Yesterday's Perek ended off with a talking about the minimum amounts that someone is chayiv for carrying out on Shabbos. So we went through a whole bunch of different items regarding animals and the different things that they eat. That was the end of Perek Zion. Today we're continuing on that theme. About minimum quantities that are considered significant in regard to the malacha of Hotzah. So Mishnah Aleph goes like this. Perek Mishnah Aleph. Hamatzi yayin kedem zigas hakos. Someone takes undiluted wine outside is liable if it's enough that when it's mixed with 3 parts of water will produce a revius. Let's say revius is 4 ounces. And there's 3 ounces which are water. So 1 ounce of undiluted wine is chayiv on Shabbos because you didn't dilute it. I mean, back in the day, wine was so strong that you needed to dilute it with 3 parts water. Nowadays, we don't do that. It's already been diluted by the time it gets to your table. So there's no reason for that. But now you're talking about revius. If you have a revius, okay, this is not halacha shiur, so the local Orthodox rabbi for practical halacha. But conceptually, it would be a whole revius that you take out because you're not dealing with the concentrated form. You're dealing with the diluted form nowadays. Chalav kedei gemia. When it takes milk outside, it carries milk, is enough for a person to swallow. Malet lugmav is a cheek foam. It's a malugmav. It's subjective based on the person. Some people have bigger cheeks, some have smaller cheeks. Devash kedelitain al hakasus. Honey is enough to apply on a wound. Honey was used as an ointment on the backs of horses and donkeys for wounds that they sustained by carrying heavy loads. And usually, in the even though honey is usually eaten, it's also used as an ointment. And the rule is that when an item has 2 frequent uses, it is that it carries the minimum for the from the 2. You would go by the minimum shiur for those 2. So the case of honey, since the minimum significant is significant size is eating of a dried fig, which is larger than the minimum useful for an ointment. Therefore, you go by the shiur of the ointment, which is much less, it's not considered food. And no one's going to eat like a little tiny bit. No one's going to eat the size that you would use for ointment. If you put some you put some neosporin thing on the wound, you're putting a little dabble. You're not putting a kazayas of ointment on the wound. That's like way too much. Okay, let's continue. Shemen gedei lasach erekatan, oil which is enough to put on a small limb even like the smallest toe of a newborn baby, that's the amount of oil for that. Mayan kadelashu behem es hakilor, water which is enough to rub into your eye, has an eye ointment. Ushar kolamashka b'revius, and all other liquids, the minimum is revius. Only these specific have these requirements. Michal has shochem revius, and for all wastewater, the minimum is revius, because wastewater, the only use for that is to making clay, and for that you needed a revius in order to be effective. Rabbi Shimon disagrees, and he says, Kulam revius, all these things, wine, milk, honey, etc., all revius. Below Amrakla shiurin lalu ella lemastiyin. That the measurements listed above, which is all less than the required revius, were only stated in regards to those who store such small amounts. The person actually stored one of those liquids in the amount listed, he would be chayiv for carrying that amount because he's showing that even that's significant. But for other people, the amount is a revius, according to Rabbi Shimon. Mishnah Beis, Hamotzi Chayva Kadelas Ozil Nakupa. If someone takes a rope, he carries a rope outside on Shabbos. It's long enough to make a handle for a basket. And Gami, Kadelas Tulai, the Nafa, the Kavra, regress was enough to make a hanging loop on a sifter or a sieve. You're not talking about such a huge amount of rope. It's like not that much. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Kedei lito imenu midas minual the katan." That the measurement for each of these things, the rope and the regress, is enough to measure the size of a child's shoe. Back in the day, they didn't have those cool contraptions that they have in the shoe store where you put your foot on it and measures your foot. And you know what size you are. You actually needed to like go in there with some sort of measurement, and you would measure it with a rope or some other. You see how they make orthotics. You know, back in the day when you got custom orthotics for your feet, for your shoes, they would put your feet into into plaster, and then they would let the plaster harden, and they would make your orthotics based on the actual image of your foot. So they had ways of measuring kids' feet for shoes. Shoes. One who takes paper outside on Shabbos is chayiv if he has enough to write a toll collector's receipt. Back in the day, not now Easy Pass, but back in the day, you went to a toll and they gave you a receipt for paying the toll, and it was a little tiny piece of paper with a signal on it, like a simon that the toll was paid. Motzi cash, probably almost like the coat check tag. Those little coat check tags, they have like two numbers. One stays on the hanger, one stays in your pocket, like something like that, maybe. Not sure. Motzi cash and moksin. We did that one already. Naya machik de lichroch al pisluchas katana shel payatun. One who carries paper which it has been erased, but is no longer fit for writing, is chayiv. It was large enough to wrap over the covering, over the opening of a bottle of perfume to seal it. So it must be a large enough piece in order to seal a small bottle for it to have any significance once it's already been written on. Okay, Mishnah Gimel, or Kedelios Kameya, one who takes a partially tanned hide out on Shabbos. If it's large enough to make a pouch for a kameya, for an amulet, then he's chayiv. Klav, they licht of Allah, parsha katanish betulin, shishma Yisrael, or a parchment that is that's enough to write the shortest the shortest parsha of Tefillin, which is Shemais. And now we know that there's four parshas in Tefillin. In Tefillin, Shalyad, it's one long parchment that has all four parshas. But in the Tefillin Sharosh, it's four different compartments, and each parsha is written on a separate cloth. And Shema Yisrael is the shortest parsha, so therefore it should have the shortest cloth. According to the Mishnah, since it's the shortest parsha, it would have the smallest piece of cloth. Interesting fun fact is that if you were to open up your tefillin, which I don't recommend doing yourself, but if you would look on the inside of your tefillin, Shalosh, you would see that the four parshios, the clothim, are pretty much the exact same size. You would say, how is it possible? Shema, the parsha Shema is a much shorter parsha than the parsha of Ayat and Shemoah. And the two other parshas are kind of longer. So how is it possible that they're rolling up to the exact same size? So the answer is that's a hiddur mitzvah to have the cloth of the shorter parshas be a thicker cloth, so that when it rolls, then the actual cloth of the longer parshas that's written on a thinner cloth, so that when it rolls up, it's rolling up to be the same size. Now, what does it matter if no one's going to see the inside of your tefillin anyways? You do it once and you don't open it up for another, many, many years. That's still the mitzvah to have the parshas nowadays to be fully to be the exact same size, even though shorter as a thicker a thicker parchment. When did that start? When did that go in the books? It was definitely after the time of the Mishnah, because the Mishnah says that you take the shortest cloth, which is Shema Yisrael, and if this was Nagaya back then, times the Mishnah, then the Mishnah would have written it differently. So that had to come into place sometime later in history, which I do not know right now what the answer is on that. Okay, sidebar completed. Let's go. So Dio G'day Lichtos de Osios ink, which is enough to write two letters on it. As you have writing two letters. Kichol G'day Lichol Einachas. Or the eye makeup, which is enough to paint one eye. How much makeup do you need to put some eyeshadow on? It's not that much. It's very little. Not that I've ever done it before, but the girls do. Okay, Mishnah Dalet Devek Deilitin Barosh Hashavsheves. One who takes glue outside is chayiv. There's enough to put on the end of a board that is used to trap birds. Zephys Ugarfis Kedelasus Nekev. Pitch or sulfur, which is enough to make a hole. Making a hole, when you have containers of mercury, which is very dangerous, they were sealed with pitch or sulfur, and a small hole is made in the seal so the mercury could be poured out carefully and not spilled. Pitch or sulfur are considered significant if the quantity suffices to form a seal large enough to make such a hole. Okay. Shaiva kedelitin alpineka katan, wax enough to put on a small hole in a wine barrel to seal it. And then from that wax hole, the wine was poured. Sorry, the hole was used to pour the wine. It was not in use. It was plugged with wax. Charas is a crushed brick. Kedei lasos pikor shall surface of, enough to seal the opening in a gold refiner's furnace. Obviously, the furnace is very, very hot. It's a special furnace in order to bring out the impurities that were in the gold when they melted it down, and it was sealed with a crushed brick in order to keep it snug and in place. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Gedelas is pitput. Rabbi Yehuda says that the minimum for crushed brick is enough to repair a leg of the gold furnace's base. Subin Gedei Litin Al Pi Korshal surface of, One who takes bran outside is chayiv if it's enough to pull over the opening of a golden furnace to preserve its heat. Seed kedei lasu ketanish v'banos. One who takes lime outside on Shabbos is chayiv if it's enough to smear on the smallest limb of a girl to remove hair. That was used as the cosmetic treatments back in the day, and be chayiv for even a small amount. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Gedela says kilkul. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and he says that it's enough to make the hair on the temples lie flat. The temples are here, right? Nechemia Omer Gedela says andifi. And Nechemia says that they're not the place below the temples to remove the hair that is growing there. This is even a smaller measurement than the other two opinions. Mishnah Hey, Dama Kechosam Marsufim. One who takes red clay outside is chayiv if it's enough to make a seal for sacks of merchandise. They used to seal the merchandise with clay in order to make sure no one tamper with it. The Rabbi Kiva is the quantity of Kiva Chum Ami Bechosam Kechosam Ha Igeres. But the Bechosam says it's enough to make a seal for letters. It would take a lot less clay to seal up a letter than it would to seal up a bag of merchandise, depending on the size of the bag, but it's big enough. The minimum for manure and fine sand is enough to fertilize a cabbage stalk. The Rabbi Akiva is the quantity of Akiva. They say, but the Chachamim say that's enough to fertilize a leek. In both of these cases, the minimum stated by Chachamim is smaller than that required by Rabbi Akiva. Chol hagas kedei litin amolo kafsid. The minimum for coarse sand is enough to add to a full trowel of lime to form plaster. Kedei kana kedei lasas kumus. That the minimum for a reed is one that's large enough to make a pen. Used to make the pens out of quills or like reeds or other feathers. And so it must be long enough to form a pen that reaches the middle joint of the writer's fingers, between the first and second knuckle. Because otherwise it would be too short to be used comfortably, and therefore he would not be chayiv on Shabbos. He wouldn't even use it. Haya ave or a meruses, the levashabo base a kalas basin, tufa and a suna. If the reed was thick or broken, which means that it cannot be used as a pen, it must be large enough to cook the most easily cooked egg, meaning a chicken's egg, after it's already been mixed with oil and placed in a preheated pan. Okay, two more to go. Mishnah Vav, Etzem Kedei Lassus Tarvad, that the minimum for a bone is one that's large enough to make a spoon. I used to have bone china, bone utensils. You used to use animal bones in order to make utensils. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Kedelas is menuchaf, but Rabbi Yehuda says that it has to be large enough to make the tooth of a key. You see one of those cool keys, like those from ancient times, with a big thing, and it had like the thing on the end to turn in, and the little bar. Then you have like a little piece with like a couple of teeth sticking out. So we're talking about those little teeth of the keys. Should be on a picture, but next time. The minimum for glass is enough to scrape the tip of a weaver's pick. When weaving cloth, the weaver would use a pick to separate the threads that had become entangled. He would sometimes scrape the tip of the pick with a small piece of glass to sharpen it, a little tiny piece. Swar or Evan Gdelizok Oaf. The minimum for a pebble or a stone is one large enough to throw at a bird to drive away. Lezer Bar Yaakov Omer Kedei Lizok Behema. Eliezer ben Yaakov says that must be large enough to throw it at an animal to drive it away. And finally, Mishnah Zayin, Cheres Kedelitim Ben Patzim Chavero, that the minimum for a shard of earthenware is enough to place between one board and another in a stack of boards. Um, when you're stacking boards of wood, you would fill in any gaps between the layers with small pieces of earthenware so that the board of the pile does not press the boards into the empty spaces, causing them to warp. And make sure that the boards are even. The Rabbi Yehuda is the according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir Omer Gedei Lachtos Bo Es Haor. Rabbi Meir says enough to scoop up a fire from a large bonfire with it, the burning coals. Rabbi Yossi Omer Gedei the Kaaba, but Rabbi Yossi says it's enough to hold a revius of liquid. And Rabbi Meir Rabbi says, even though there's no proof of this matter, meaning that a piece of earthenware is significant if you can pick up a coal, there is a hint to it in the following pasuk. The law you must say hello, you must say mechitaso cheres lactos ish miyakut. There should not be found among its pieces a shard of earthenware to take a burning coal from a fire. That's from Yeshaya, referring to a earthenware vessel. This pasuk says that it will be so completely shattered that none of the pieces will be large enough to pick up a burning coal. By specifying a piece of this size, the pasuk implies that anything similar is not significant. Rabbi Yossi said to him, Misham Raya, from there you infer proof, the Lachshav Mayim Megeva. On the contrary, the verse supports my ruling, meaning that the minimum that the minimum is a piece that can hold liquid. The pasuk continues, or to scoop water from a pit. Here the pasuk implies that even a shard that can hold water is significant. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow. Perek test. Have a wonderful day. Stay warm.